Good evening, everybody. So lovely to be back with you on this Tuesday night. If you're watching this as my Facebook Live, lovely and so pleased if you're watching this on my YouTube channel as a video, or indeed if you're listening to this as one of my podcasts. So it's October 2021 and we're in the middle of World Menopause Awareness Month, and in the UK we've had yesterday was sort of Menopause Awareness Day, and it's become in the UK such a really big there's a really big awareness around the menopause, giving it much greater attention and respect, and respecting the fact that this is something very natural that women are going through, and trying to certainly create a greater awareness in organisations and companies to support women. Now, I've deliberately titled this about finding alternative approaches to HRT. What I do want to make clear is I'm not knocking HRT. It's got a really important role for many, many women, and it makes their lives so much easier to go through the menopause. There are different sorts of HRT available, so just very briefly, do make sure you get good advice from your GP, because it's not all about synthetic versions of HRT. There are body identical versions of HRT that may have lesser long-term side effects. It needs investigating. But tonight, of course, I'm a naturopath, I'm a nutritionist. I wanted to talk about the approaches that you can take to help you transition through the menopause more smoothly. Now, it's a natural thing that we go through the menopause. It's not a medical condition. We don't need to diagnose it, although many women will go and get blood tests because they want to know. But it's going to be a very natural progression that can take over 10 years. And we get the pre-menopause, and some symptoms may start to appear. We then start to go through this perimenopausal time when periods become very irregular. They might get really heavy. And then we transition into the post-menopause, which is when we've had 12 months of no menstrual cycle at all. That is when menopause officially should start, and effectively we are then spending a third of our lives or more in this sort of post-menopausal state. So it's so important that we think of everything that we can do to keep ourselves healthy for that period. But there's so much we can do to help this transition that I'm going to explain, and I'm sure I'm going to explain things that you may not be familiar with. Now, symptoms are quite far-ranging, and some of these are more well-known than others. We've got things like poor brain function. You know, people, their memory seems to go, cognition seems to be a bit poor, concentration can be affected, people can get low mood, and they can suffer from heightened anxiety, even be diagnosed with depression. We then get the hormonal symptoms like hot flushes, low libido, sore breasts, and more. There could be digestive problems that become exacerbated during this time, whether it's constipation, or it could be diarrhea or alternating bowel regularity. It could be more IBS type symptoms. It could be bloating. And there could be more generalized symptoms. You could start to get muscle soreness. You may be fatigued. You may have trouble sleeping. You may be experiencing weight gain. So no two people are the same. Like with everything that I talk about and with every client that I help, no two people are going to experience the same symptoms for similar types of things. And so just because some women may say they sail through the menopause, or some women may experience certain symptoms, you may have something completely different. So don't compare. It's just important to think about what you can do to give yourself the best chance of minimizing some of these symptoms. So, of course, the menopause happens because women are born with a finite number of eggs. So this is completely different to men. At birth, women have a finite number of eggs that mature on this monthly cycle. And then at the end of our sort of fertility, these eggs start to run out effectively. And this is what the menopause is about. We've got this finite number of eggs and we suddenly don't produce any more, and suddenly don't release anymore. And this is why we don't get periods anymore, which is linked to our main hormones of estrogen and progesterone. So we will be very familiar with those hormones. So these are linked to the ovaries and the eggs and what is happening on that monthly cycle. So when we reach the menopause and when there are no more eggs produced, our levels of estrogen and progesterone rapidly decline. It can be quite gradual to start with, but it rapidly declines. And this is when these symptoms can become quite apparent. Now, what you may not be aware of at all, and it's really important and is quite a big focus of what I'm going to talk about, is that the adrenal glands produce weaker forms of estrogen, which is estradiol and estrone, weaker forms of estrogen and progesterone that helps this transition through the menopause. So if we take good care of our adrenal glands, it's going to make this transition much smoother. And it's something that I really want to focus on. So adrenal glands, these adrenal glands, they sit on top of our kidneys, and they are a major source of our stress hormones. They are busy pumping out cortisol and adrenaline. And of course, today we are leading increasingly stressful, busy lives. We don't give our adrenal glands much chance to switch off. They're on the go all the time, and without us really realizing it, we could be late picking the children up from school, we could be in a traffic jam, we could be thinking of all the deadlines we've got to meet. Women in particular are terrible, and I'm one myself, terrible at adding to-do lists and more things that we have to do. I think men sometimes are a little bit more relaxed about all the jobs they have to do, and if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But women are really hard on themselves, and they add more and more things to their to-do list. And you know, we're led to believe in our society and what we see on TV and Instagram that we should have this perfect life, and as we all know, that's just not the case. So we can create additional stresses on ourselves in addition to the external stresses that are placed on us. So when we're experiencing all this stress, and without realizing it, the body is going to be pumping out more and more adrenaline and cortisol. And this is so important when we think about the menopause and when we're thinking about how we've got these alternative sources and weaker forms of estrogen and progesterone that can come from the adrenal glands. And what this is to do with is we have to, I'm not going to get into the technicalities and the names, but what's important to understand is the cortisol and these forms of estrogen and progesterone that come from the adrenal glands all come from the same base precursor called pregnenolone. Prior to that, it's cholesterol, which I'm going to briefly talk on. Now, we've got a finite amount of this precursor, and what's going to happen, because the body is always going to favor survival over producing stress hormones. So our age-old fight or flight and survival mechanism, which is what we're born with, the body will think, I'm stressed, I need to survive, and it will produce cortisol. And although we may be crying out for weak forms of estrogen and progesterone, the body will just put that to one side and isn't going to be producing it in the amounts that it is able to produce. And whilst these are weaker forms, they are sufficient and should be sufficient to help minimize the symptoms that we can experience through the menopause because we're not producing those hormones from our eggs and through the ovaries. So it's so important when we understand that if we're stressed, we're going to be producing cortisol at the expense of producing our estrogen and progesterone from the adrenal glands. Once we understand that, we can say, okay, I'm really, really stressed and I'm really, really busy, but what can I do in my lifestyle to try and minimize the amount of stress that I'm experiencing? And we can go away and we can start to think about what we can do. But over and above that, it's really important to start practicing and engaging things that are going to calm the stress response down. Because we can't take away all the stresses that we experience, but we can certainly do something to try and minimize the fight or flight stress response that's going to pump out cortisol and try and switch the body into our fight or flight, not fight or flight, our rest and digest, the parasympathetic arm of our nervous system that's going to calm everything down and gives these adrenal glands a bit of a break and may enable them to then switch from producing cortisol to producing estrogen and progesterone. So I'll talk about this so many times, but you know, the top of my list and my favorite things are thinking about deep abdominal breathing, practicing some yoga, doing some Pilates, going for a walk, listening to relaxing music, picking up the phone and chatting to some friends that are going to make you laugh, essential oils, having a relaxing bath, you know, at any time of day if you're feeling stressed, you know, something that is going to calm your body down. You've got to find ways to tap into something that resonates with you and is going to make you feel more calm than feel more stressed. And self-care, and I'm going to talk more and more about self-care, because I think self-care and finding time to practice self-care is absolutely critical in our lives. And women, men as well, but women, we're just rubbish at it. So we need to, you know, I think about getting up in the morning and we need to find some time to do that. We need to find other times during the day. We need to be able to start tapping into when we're feeling a bit stressed. Okay, what can I go and do for 5 minutes that is going to help calm the body down? It's a really, really important thing linking back to the menopause, calming this stress response down so we're not pumping out cortisol and we can produce some estrogen, weaker forms of estrogen and progesterone. Now, the next thing to do with this is balancing blood sugar. So I talk a lot about this. You know, we need to eat in a certain way that's going to keep our blood glucose levels stable. We don't want glucose levels yo-yoing up and down throughout the day. What happens when blood sugar is high and it will then plummet low, in very simplistic terms, is that it triggers a stress response. When blood sugar is low, this is our survival instinct coming in again, there's a stress response that's triggered. So going over what I've just said, we don't want that to happen. The reason why it happens when glucose is low is that in turn is when it prepares the body for fight or flight, it thinks it needs a lot of energy for muscles, for running, for fighting. And so it makes sure there's plenty of glucose in the bloodstream for a really quick source of energy, which is what we don't need when psychologically we've got stress going on in our head. So we need to keep blood sugar levels as stable as we can. In very simple terms, what we need to be thinking about is always making sure when we look at our plate that we've got at least a third of our plate with good quality protein and fats, half the plate of low, starchy, non-root, lots of colour, lots of variety of vegetables, and a small portion of complex carbohydrates like brown rice. You may choose not to put those on your plate at all, but if you do, I don't say you've got to take them out of your diet completely, but keep the portion really slow. This will help to keep your blood sugar levels stable throughout the day, helps to keep your energy more stable, helps your concentration, helps you cope with stress better. And what was I going to say? It's just gone from my head. It helps minimize that stress response that's just so important. So we need to be thinking about eating like that all the time. And following on from that is thinking about our good fats. So going back to this precursor I talked about, which produces these hormones, that precursor comes from cholesterol. Yes, we need cholesterol in our bodies. It's not about minimizing cholesterol all the time. We need cholesterol for many, many functions, and we need cholesterol via the adrenal glands to be producing these hormones. So cholesterol is produced naturally in the body. It's produced in the liver. That's the predominant source of cholesterol. But we need good sources of fats. Our good fats are so important. That's going to help to keep the body healthy, but it's going to enable this production of cholesterol for what we need. So our good sources of fats is going to be our oily fish like salmon, mackerel and sardines, avocados, nuts and seeds, olive oil, good quality extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, olives. Those are fantastic sources of good fats. Eating those in abundance in our diet is a priority. And of course, some saturated fat is absolutely fine, but do make sure you get these good quality fats into your diet as well. Chia seeds and flax seeds, didn't mention those, and those are also really important. Adaptogenic herbs. Now, this is something else I recommend to clients a lot when they're particularly under a lot of stress. What adaptogenic herbs are, they are adaptogens. They help the body cope with stress. They provide resilience to the body. They help to lower the stress response. They can help provide a source of cortisol if the body is struggling to produce cortisol. It can help with physical performance like fatigue. It can help mental performance like reducing anxiety and memory. And they work to balance cortisol, making it not too high or too low, which is why they're called adaptogens. They help the body to adapt to our stress levels. Now I have 3 favourites that I use: ashwagandha, rhodiola and shatavari. But you do need to be careful, because if you're on antidepressants and SSRIs or on HRT, then you need to be a little bit careful about your choice of these. And do make sure you take guidance over what you might use in terms of adaptogenic herbs. But they can be a really nice addition to what you may already be trying to do. And if nothing else, it can help to lower anxiety and stress. The next thing I want to talk about is phytoestrogens. I'm sure you'd have heard of phytoestrogens. It's a very common thing to go along and think, oh, I need my phytoestrogens when I'm going through the menopause. Now, what are phytoestrogens? They are plant-based compounds. That's where the word phyto comes from. And what they do is they produce, I'm not going to call it a weak source of estrogen, but they have compounds that provide an estrogenic effect to the body. And what these phytoestrogens actually do is they latch on to our receptors on our cells that need estrogens. So it's like a lock and key. And so estrogen is going to lock onto receptors. And if we're lacking estrogen, or this estrogen that's coming from the adrenal glands, phytoestrogens lock onto those cells. And so what they're doing is they're providing a really weak source of estrogen activity to those cells, which in turn can help to minimize symptoms. Now, first and foremost, you need to think about dietary sources. We've got to start incorporating these foods in the diet every single day, and as many of these foods as possible. So we need to think about fermented soya, and I've deliberately chosen the word fermented. None of this non-fermented soya, milk and yogurts. It's not what the Japanese and the Far Eastern cultures eat. Different, it's processed. You want the fermented soya that comes from tempeh and natto. They're the best sources. And miso. You may have some edamame beans. They're good things to eat. Flax seeds, best eaten milled, because flax seeds are so tiny that they go straight out the other end. Great source of fibre, but you're not going to get the benefits from them. So have them milled. You can buy them from Linwood's, one of my favourite sources. Celery, great. I love celery with hummus. Sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, chickpeas, hummus. So celery and hummus, great source. You've got a double whammy there, getting some phytoestrogens. Lentils and pulses. And your cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and cabbage. All of these are all great sources of phytoestrogen. So first and foremost, just look at your diet. Are you eating lots of these? It's no good saying, oh, I put a little bit of flaxseed on my porridge today. What else are you eating on a daily basis? It's got plenty of these sources of phytoestrogens in your diet. And then over and above that, you might go and look at phytoestrogens in herbal forms. And so common ones are things like red clover and sage, and they can be very helpful. But don't do those and think, oh, I'm just going to take a supplement of those. Oh, it's not very helpful. It's not working very well, because it's just one aspect, and you need to think about all these sources of phytoestrogens in your diet. And just finally, I want to talk about your liver. We need to love our livers. Our liver is involved in 500 processes. It's a major organ in the body. It's got amazing reproduction abilities. It can rejuvenate itself when it's given the right tools and nutrients to do so. But it's under a lot of pressure in the modern world. You know, it's a major source of it's a major role in detoxification. It's why doctors will say that detoxifying diets and cleanses are just rubbish, because the liver is detoxifying all the time. Well, yes, the liver is detoxifying all the time. We would be dead if the liver wasn't able to detoxify. So we know it's doing that, but it's under so much pressure and it has so much burden. I can't remember the stats, but the amount of man-made chemicals that's in our environment and in our foods and what we're eating compared to, say, the 1950s or the post-war environment is just phenomenal. We are constantly consuming chemicals all the time. Now, we don't need to go completely organic, but that's where I love the EWG Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen to try and identify the cleanest fruit and vegetables that we can buy with the least pesticides on it. But do give your liver a little bit of care and attention. So first and foremost, minimize your chemicals in your diet. Have clean food, clean whole food. We don't want to be eating processed foods. That puts an additional burden on the liver as well. We don't want to have too many pesticides and fertilizers. And then there are certain foods that really support the liver function. So we've got things like lemons, olive oil, and beetroot, herbs and spices. You know, herbs and spices are just great nutritional compounds that they contain and phytonutrients in them that are really going to support the liver function. Cruciferous vegetables, again, here are really, really important for liver function. Now, in terms of diet, give your liver a break from digestion. It's very much involved in digestion. So after we've digested our food and it goes into the bloodstream, it goes to the liver. So the bigger break we can give overnight from doing this, the better the liver's got for doing its hormonal functions of metabolizing and synthesizing our sex hormones that go through the liver. So having a minimum of a 12-hour break, and even ideally getting up to 16 hours, and this is getting into time restricted eating, I know, but maybe a couple of days a week you could consider doing that. Takes the burden off the liver from one of these other functions that it has to do, and is just going to help it do its role for synthesizing hormones through the body. Make sure you're staying hydrated, water and herbal and fruit teas, keeping it well hydrated. So this is just a really quick snapshot of all the ways that we can help to support the body transition through the menopause without necessarily relying on HRT. As I said, I'm not knocking HRT, and it's really helpful for women to get through this period of time in their lives. But these other aspects, and that's why we have to take this 360-degree approach holistically to looking after our body. Each single step along the way all has a very, very important role in helping the body move through this phase in life without having necessarily having such extreme symptoms along the way. Thank you for watching tonight. Do remember to catch up with my other videos on my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health, and my podcast on my website, Peyton Principles. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Next week will be my final one, probably until December. I'm going away on holiday. I'm having a big break, I hope, fingers crossed. And I'm going to have a bit of a break through November. So I will be back next week for my last one in October. I'll be back in December, and I'll definitely be ramping things up again in the new year as well. So have a great week, everybody, and hope to see you next week. Bye.